Okay guys, welcome back. Today we are tying a small crayfish pattern. I really love this pattern for both bass and carp fishing. We're going to start off with Nano Silk by Simplify. This is 6/0 and olive. The hook we're using is a Ahrex TP650, 26-degree bent hook. And the bead is a 7mm olive football bead by Spawn Fly Fishing. And we're going to wrap our thread all the way back. We're going to start it behind the bead and wrap it all the way to the bend of the hook. Nice touching wraps all the way to the bend. We're tied in barred crazy legs, olive green flake. This is going to be our antenna. So we're going to use 2 strands of this. We're going to tie it in on one side of the hook, both strands, wrap down a few wraps. I tie this in the middle. So you got 2 strands, you're going to tie it halfway down the strand. You're going to tie it back a few wraps and then over the hook to the other side and wrap back over. So now you got both sides tied in with one tie-in point basically. And this is going to serve as the antenna of the crayfish. Now you can trim these now because they're going to be a little bit long. So you can trim them now or you can trim them at the end. I usually trim them at the end just to make sure they're proportionate to the rest of the fly. And this is going to ride hook point up. So now we're going to be tying in our feelers, our mouth feelers of the fly, and we're using moose body hair for this. So moose body hair, you don't have to stack this. They don't have to be even. I do like to tie it in with the hook point up here. Since this is the head of the fly here, and I want this moose to be on this side of the hook shank. If you tie it on the other side, this is going to be, those feelers are going to be pointing the opposite direction that you want them to. So this is one of the materials you definitely want to tie on this side of the hook, along with the eyes, and we'll get to that next. So you're just going to tie that in and wrap back a few wraps to get it tight. You're just going to trim off the excess hair. And you're just going to flatten down the rest of it. Just make sure there's no extra hairs sticking out. And like I said, you can stack the moose body hair if you want. They don't have to be all even, though. Don't be too concerned with that. Just make sure it's tight, nothing's rolled to the other side, and those antennae are still in place. Everything looks good. You're going to go ahead and wrap back up right behind where you tied in the moose body hair, and we're going to be putting our eyes, which is bead chain. This is black bead chain, and this is in the small size. This isn't adding a lot of weight here. So that big old 7mm bead is going to be all your weight. So this is still going to be riding hook point up, even with that little extra weight on the other side of the hook shank here. We're just going to do figure 8s and cross wraps and get these eyes tied in real tight. Just do enough wraps to get it tight where it's not moving when you wiggle it. And once you get that to that point, I don't count my wraps or anything. I just make sure that that's tight before I move on. You don't want those eyes to be sliding around. And I also, for extra security, I do add some super glue here. And I use Loctite super glue. Any super glue will work. You can also use head cement. And I just put a dab on the back side. Put a little dab in between the eyes and a little bit behind the eyes. That's just for extra security. Now we're going to go with the Craw Dub and pale olive. This is going to be the head, basically, of the crayfish. We're going to do a few wraps in front of the eyes, and then we're going to actually kind of figure eight the dubbing through the eyes, and then build a little dubbing ball behind the eyes. And I've said this in previous videos with the dubbing. I'll say it again because it is important to understand. Put as little dubbing on as you can while you're dubbing anything, because it's easier to add more dubbing to your thread than it is to take it off. And I do use dubbing wax. I use a dubbing wax by Wapsi. I put it on my fingers and then grab the dubbing. So you're not seeing me use the wax here in the video, but I am using it. Then once I build the head up with that dubbing, there's that little ball behind is going to help with the claws here. And the claws are right there. Those are the Indian henback feathers. This is an olive, and I already prepared these feathers. They're the same size, and I cut a little triangle out at the tip to represent claws and little pinchers. So we're going to tie in one feather at a time right behind that little dubbing ball. That little dubbing ball also aids in pushing those claws out a little bit. See how it splays the feather out some. You do want to tie these feathers in on the side of the hook. A lot of times they do want to roll to the bottom when you're tying them in. So turn your vise around and check that before you move on. Now, a lot of people have issues with lining up your claws, making sure they're the same length out the front. To do that, a little trick is to prepare the feathers before you tie it in, and you actually just make sure they're even where the feather meets the stem for both feathers. And when you tie them in, you know when you're tying behind that feather where it meets the stem, you know they're both going to be even when you're done. You don't have to worry about it. I hope that made sense. I can do another video on preparing the feathers if you want. And I do tie in that stem all the way to the bead. It just helps the body stay even. There's no big lumps or a drop off in the body. So there's your claws on both sides. They haven't been pushed or rolled to the bottom. They look pretty good. And you don't have to cut those little triangles out in the feather. I just did that for fun. All right, the Straggle hackle. This is by Upavon. This is in their Camo color. This is going to be the body. So we're going to tie it in. We're going to start the wraps. So we're going to tie it in right behind the claws. Now with this hackle here, you want to wrap it just like you would thread. You're going to do touching wraps, and you're going to pull all the fibers back to make sure they're all facing the same direction. So your first wrap is right behind the claws. Then you're going to pull back all those fibers. So they're not, there you go. So they're all facing the same direction. Pull it back so they're out of the way. And your next wrap should touch the last wrap. And you're just going to do that all the way back to the bead. You could use your rotary function, but if you do that, I find that I trap more fibers. I'm not palmering it back with my hand. So I just do it manually like this. And it makes it easier for me. I'm not picking out trapped fibers at the end. So you're going to go ahead and wrap that all the way back to the bead. And you're going to want to seat this bead pretty tight. It is a big bead, and I didn't add any extra lead into that bead. So just get that real tight up against there. And that bead is a football bead, so it's not round. So you want to make sure that bead is straight on your hook, because it does tend to want to roll, and you don't want that. So just make sure it's even and it's real tight up against that bead. And you're going to lay a nice big thread dam once you cut this off. So go ahead and trim it, and then you're just going to build a little thread dam, or rather large thread dam really, behind this, or right up against the bead. So just make sure you're not trapping a whole bunch of fibers, but let's go ahead and build that up. Basically, you just don't want the bead wiggling around anymore. Just make sure it's real tight. And all the fibers look good. Nothing trapped or anything. If you do ever have trapped fibers, you can just use a bodkin to pull those fibers out, or a little brush. It's not a big deal. It's very easy to do. And then once you get this thread dam built and the bead's not moving anymore, you're going to go ahead and whip finish off. And we're done with the tying portion of the fly. So everything looks good here. Like I said, no trapped fibers. The bead's not moving anymore. It's tight. It's not going anywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and whip finish this. Do a 5-turn whip finish. Go ahead and snip your thread. And like I said, the tying portion of this is all done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be making the shell back of the crayfish, and we're going to be doing that with UV resin. So you want to separate all these fibers to each side, so it kind of splits down the middle, and you can use a bodkin to separate those fibers. Once you start separating, you'll notice they want to lay a certain way, and you're going to want to kind of just go right down the middle and just push all those fibers to each side. And then we're going to use Solarez Thin for the back here. So once you get it to where you want it, you're going to preen all those down, hold it, and then apply your UV resin here. Be a little generous here. This is a shell back, so this is supposed to be kind of bulky here. So just add a little layer. I do all the way up onto the bead. Then you're going to hit it with your UV light. I hit it a couple times like that, on and off, because I don't want the resin to start vaporizing and like smoking, if you will. I want it to cook nice and smooth. So, and I do have a lot on there, so you are going to hold on that UV torch on there for a little bit longer than you would maybe like a nymph head or something like that. So just make sure it does cure all the way. And the light I'm using, this is the Loon Infinity light. This is the rechargeable one. I do recommend it. You can just recharge it and you're good to go. You don't have to worry about having batteries on hand all the time. So, all right, looks like that's set. And there's the legs and the shell back. And I'm going to go ahead now and basically just trim my antennae to where I want them. You can make these as long or as short as you want. There's no rules there. I usually make them a little bit longer than the feelers of the mouth. And there you go, the little crayfish pattern. Like I said, this is a great pattern for both bass and carp in my local river systems. If you guys have any questions about it, please feel free to drop those in the comments. And again, as always, thanks for watching.